Our next module is project scope management. Here we're going to get into the detail of defining the scope, figuring it out, and working with it. There are 6 different processes that we look at in this knowledge area. We plan scope management, we collect requirements, we define scope, we create the work breakdown structure, WBS, we validate the scope, and then we control the scope. So planning scope management. Again, this will be part of the overall project management plan, but we plan scope management looking at it differently. Each of the knowledge areas has a slight different focus, and so we do that. The inputs here, we have the project management plan, the project charter, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. We use the tools of expert judgment here as well, and meetings. And the output is our scope management plan. We're planning the scope, planning scope management. So it's not so much that we have the scope defined yet, but we do know how we're going to approach scope management as it goes through the project. It's very important to get this clear early on. The scope is what we are doing. What product or service are we delivering? So this is an important piece. The requirements management plan is slightly different. It's a plan that deals specifically with the requirements that we gather. The requirements sometimes are equal to scope, but the requirements kind of break things into a little more distinct pieces. So the requirements can be fairly detailed, and how we manage them, how we handle them, how we store them, who touches them is an important thing to get separate from the scope management plan. So we're going to collect our requirements. How are we going to do that? Well, you get our input. We have the scope management plan, requirements management plan, stakeholder management plan. And why do we have them? We have them because we have identified and are managing these stakeholders, and that's who we're going to gather the requirements from. The people that are most affected are a source of input to the requirements. So it makes perfect sense that if we're collecting requirements, our stakeholders should be involved. We also have the project charter and the stakeholder register. We'll use a lot of different tools and techniques here. We'll use interviews, we'll use focus groups, facilitated workshops, group creative techniques, group decision-making techniques, questionnaires and surveys, observations and prototypes, benchmarking, context diagrams, document analysis, and out of this we get our requirements documentation through all these types of things. Now, again, I've said before, just because I have a set of tools and techniques here doesn't mean I use each and every one of them for each and every project. This gives me a full set of different tools that are at my disposal. So if I need one, I know how to use it and can use it. Some tools are better for different projects. Just realize, because requirements gathering is done a lot of different ways, we're exposing you to a lot of different techniques in the gathering of it. Requirements traceability matrix, we'll look at one of those. That just allows you to track your requirements from the moment you identify it all the way until that requirement has been built into a service or a device or whatever, but it become a deliverable. When the requirement becomes a deliverable, we track it all the way there and even beyond into the testing of it, into the actual deployment of it. So the traceability matrix is not a strict guideline, but it gives us a device to be able to keep up with everything and make sure at the end that if we required something at the beginning, that we actually deliver it at the end. So some basic rules about requirements gathering. Define things explicitly. That means in detail, that means reframing, restating, that means do your best communication when you're doing the gathering. Employ graphics and prototyping. If you can figure out what it looks like or draw a picture, if you understand the color that you want, if that's important. Trust me, requirements can be an interesting thing and never ignore color. I was working for a large box company, and they did not make a requirement of the vendor they were bringing in on the color of the brackets in which they were going to be putting television sets all over the place. And the person who brought them all in orange. Well, this is not the orange store they were going in. This was the other one. And little did they know that orange was a forbidden color in this particular store. So they had to basically pull them all out and repaint them. So when you're doing your requirements, there is no such thing as too small a question, too insignificant. If it would make a difference, you better ask. Embracing change control is an important part of requirements gathering. Why is that? Well, it's easy. When you're gathering requirements, you need to know, and the people you're gathering from need to know that, yes, you're telling me it needs to be X, Y, and Z. But we have a process over here that you could change it to ABC if you needed to. It may be complicated, it may not be. But you do have a process. Embracing the change control means that you are aware of it, you know how it works, you've exercised it, and you're willing to take people through it. It's been my experience that the more people use these tools like change control and embrace it, the more likely they will use them, and they'll use them properly, and they'll use them in a timely manner, and it won't be, it doesn't become a problem later on. Okay, when we're looking here at evaluate and monitor alignment, what we're talking about here is not simply the alignment of staff amongst each other, aligning the goals and responsibilities of various stakeholders. This is also about aligning the different requirements together and evaluate how the requirements sort of fit into categories. You don't want to redo something, so you want to look at the requirements and see if, say you're designing a screen for a GUI and you've made a decision on a color. Well, the requirement for that color could be used for multiple other screens if that color is desirable and available. So that's one of the things. So align the requirements up to maximize your efficiency in building this product or service. That's really why we want to look at it and make sure that we're keeping it, monitor it so that you keep things in the right buckets so to speak. And it's easy when you have a traceability matrix because everything is uniquely numbered and you can find it in, if it's electronic, you can search on it. So it's easier in that sense. But it's an important piece of requirements gathering. And requirements need a sign off. Somebody has to say, yes, these are good. Generally, that is a stakeholder, at least, a sponsor, possibly somebody who has that power. The person that is the money keeper is one of the huge people that do it, sponsor. But it doesn't have to be. It just has to be someone who has the ability and the wherewithal to make that kind of decision and sign off. There are a lot of folks in some corporate settings that find that difficult. They don't wish the responsibility of signing off on requirements. It is an absolute must-have to be successful. So realize as you're putting together your thoughts on requirements gathering. And I know as a project manager, you may or may not be heavily involved in requirements gathering. You may have a business analyst, a systems analyst, other people who are doing this kind of requirements gathering. But you are the leader as project manager. And so you need to be aware of the techniques and aware of best practices so you can lead the team to a successful project. Other techniques, we use brainstorming. It pops up a lot, and I'm going to take a second with it right now. But brainstorming isn't simply getting a bunch of people in a room and talking. Brainstorming is best if you have some focus, and by that I mean let's come up with ideas of how to use this yellow cup, if that's pertinent to the project you're doing, or how many ways could we market this new widget. But kind of focus it, drive it, facilitate it. There are no bad ideas in brainstorming, and you want to encourage people to share, and you want to try and get some kind of action plan from the end. And it can be, and the techniques to do this, I love Post-it notes, I love big sheets of paper, I love dry erase marker boards. Remember, you have a camera on your phone now. Nothing should ever get lost. We should always be able to find the product of this kind of a facilitated brainstorming session. And you can break them into smaller sessions if that's necessary. There aren't a whole lot of rules. It's about being successful. Certain personalities work better in brainstorming than others. You have to play it by ear to a certain degree, but I do encourage it because it can lead to some remarkable discoveries. Interviewing is, when you're gathering requirements and you're interviewing, number one, I use a recording device. So I don't have to write down every word they say, and I get their permission to do that. And then take pictures, get them to draw pictures. But you interview them, you have certain questions that you want to find out. If you are trying to, what's the requirements of a new purse line. If I'm putting together a new purse line and I want to interview about what's the important parts of that, what are the requirements of this purse, what kind of questions can I ask? Well, I could ask, how do you use your purse? What do you put in your purse? How often do you change your purse? Have you ever lost anything in your purse? Are you interested in a new purse? I mean, there's lots of different questions that you can ask that will help you drive towards requirements. if I'm doing a purse for a 45-year-old, that I would not interview a bunch of 16-year-olds about a purse. Match your groups. So be aware that, just because you're going to be asking questions, it doesn't mean all questions to all people. Have a list of questions. You can deviate from it, but think through what you're trying to gather. Why am I asking these questions? Doesn't mean you're pushing them to an answer. It does mean that you've thought through this so that you can minimize their time and yours, and you can maximize the information that comes back. It becomes workable, actionable information. Observation, I've gathered requirements in many different ways. One of the ways you can do it is just sit behind somebody and watch how they do their work. If you're designing a new application for a point of sale system, I've sat on a stool behind the cash register in several stores over different periods with different people working them and watched how they did what they did. And occasionally ask them a question and see what they thought would be, a better way. But observing is a great way of understanding the end user experience, and it's best when used in that way. You can also use observation for other projects. Seeing how people are in the park, eating habits in restaurants, to see if you could make a better fork or plate, or there's no end to what you can observe. Again, as long as you can make it actionable. Observations are useless unless you can put them in a way of communicating to somebody else, make sense of them. You can look at documents. Document analysis to do requirements is highly underdone in some places. But if you want to know about you can reverse engineer, if you will. You can take a literature on your, I was going to say VCR, but who has a VCR anymore? But you could take it on your smartphone and look at that and really analyze, what's that document telling me? What do I have here? And be able to gather information that could be made into requirements if you wanted to do an app for the phone. So document analysis is something good. If you have old documentation for a system that's being upgraded, wonderful place to start. How did it get built the first time? Can we use any of that to jumpstart our requirements gathering while we make it easy on us? Remember, these techniques are all about being successful. And anything you can bring to be more successful is great. The PMBOK loves success. They like different, they like some tools and techniques better than others, but they are very much looking at these kinds of things. And you could have questions that utilize this, but not directly ask you to name, 4 techniques of requirements gathering or something like that. Prototyping, I like to prototype, and it can be as simple as, let me draw it out on a sheet of paper and see if this makes sense to you. Or if you're good at folding paper, you could fold something. Or get someone to. It gives you more, especially when you're prototyping and it's a 3-dimensional thing. It really gives you a better sense of what you're talking about and the requirements that it might have. Now, it's not foolproof, but it is an excellent way of really having a better understanding of the final product. And depends on how elaborate you get with the prototyping. It could be, spot on. It just depends on the specifics. Facilitating requirements, workshops, and focus groups. Yes, a lot of words. Having workshops and facilitating them is not unlike what I was discussing with brainstorming, but it's a little more formalized, and it's really, I look at it as being focused. And by facilitating, you have someone who is there to kind of run things. So they are asking questions and they are adjusting people and sometimes pulling people back from the breach, or helping someone to, share their ideas. If it's not clearly communicated, the facilitator might be able to offer that clarity for the group. So all those things can happen. Focus groups, in this sense, are really talking about gathering like-minded people, and you have them focus on a specific set of topics or observations. I think the easiest example to give you is on the latest rash of television commercials from car dealerships, where they have groups of people, and the commercial takes them through. Would you like this? Well, would you like this? And kind of gathers what their preferences are based on showing them cars. Well, that's but they came to see that. They joined willingly, and they're focused in on that specific topic. Interface identification is here specifically because when things are joined, whether they're applications that have to be hooked together or other items that have to have some type of connection, identifying all the connections can lead to a good, requirements. For instance, I have a desktop computer in my office at home. Well, interface information in identification is an important thing, because that computer, I got a good price on it, brought it home, and realized that it has no high def connection. So I was not able to hook it to my high def TV, which I use as a monitor. Now, if I had identified all the interface, if I had taken the time maybe to look at document analysis, look for the interfaces and check, I would have known that that was going to be an issue, and could have identified that as a potential, I don't want this particular computer, I want a different one. That's just an example of how things can be used. But any interface that you have, as long as you are looking and are complete, you can discover a lot of requirements, and some you may have talked about, or maybe you just assumed. A lot of us do that. We assume that everything's okay until it's not. Questionnaires and surveys, the other way, is send out stuff. There's a lot on sent out through everybody. Every company does this now, but the surveys, the questionnaires, you get them back, and it can give you information depending on how you do the surveys and depending on how they are answered. Sometimes the information is not as good. Sometimes it's inconsistent, but it's a valid way of gathering requirements. Now, once you gather your requirements, we're looking here at a requirements traceability matrix. And what we're demonstrating with this is that I can come over here and look at a business requirement, which I have uniquely numbered, I can trace that to system requirements. They're actually 2, uniquely numbered. So it takes 2 system requirements to meet that business requirement. Now, and let me take a moment here so we're all on the same sheet of music. A business requirement is from a business perspective. Usually it's something that will, is in business language. So for instance, you might have a business requirement that the full name of the user must be displayed on a screen. Well, okay, the system requirement might take that and say we need to create a 12-digit name field of a certain size, etc. So it may have a design kind of quality to it, more detail, and it takes that business, it takes what the business requirement is saying, and it takes it to a step of digitizing it, making it cleaner, more precise. Then you have design, and the design element, has only one element here, and you have unit testing, system testing, integration testing, user acceptance testing, and then you have comments field. This is, an easy template. This is not supposed to be terribly difficult. And if you need better, more room, or more fields, more whatever, then do whatever it makes sense to you and works within your organization. You might not do system test. You might not do integration testing. The point is, as much as you can get and link together, that means that when I come back at the end of this project and I went down my UAT list and I looked at this and I said, did this pass UAT? And if you come back to me and you're charged of UAT and you say, case 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 all passed, I should be able to know that the 3 requirements, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, also were met. If it passed UAT, the requirements were good. We don't have to worry about that. I can validate that. And if it comes back and we have someone else say, no, we're not really getting this functionality that was in 1.1, then I can ask the UAT people, why did you pass this? So there's checks and balances to this. It's informational. It keeps it all in one place, and it's not supposed to be overburdensome. Typically, these things are created fairly early on, and they're maintained by multiple parties with agreed upon ways of numbering it and where they keep it and collaborating on it. So this is a great tool. I highly recommend this. So here we're going to define scope. We're defining scope. And our inputs are our scope management plan, the project charter, requirements documents, our organizational process assets. We use the techniques of expert judgment, product analysis, we'll talk a little about that, alternative generation, facilitated workshops, and the output is our project scope statement, as well as any updates to the project documents. Just a minute on this one. Yeah, what we're trying to do here, realize we already have some kind of a scope statement of sorts. Where? In the charter. We've looked at requirements documentation. So we've asked some questions. We've put down words. The item needs to have the ability to do X, Y, and Z. It needs to be of a certain size. And we've gathered that information. So when we're looking at the scope statement here, we're looking at pulling together that general kind of objective that the charter has in it, and the requirements that we've documented, and we want to put this together to make it a little bit more solid statement of what this product or service is going to actually be. And that's really what we're pushing towards with this. Now, scope statements, they can be, it's a product or service description. It can have an acceptance criteria. Think about that. We may, in our charter, just say we need a certain application. I need a point of sale system. And through our requirements documentation, we may discover certain qualities that are out there, good and bad. So in our scope statement, we want to describe the product and service that we want, and we want to also put in there what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, to make sure we deliver what is being asked for. And specifically, what is that deliverable? If it is an item or a service, be as specific as we can without getting, and there are levels of detail. Just realize this doesn't have to be, it has to be as detailed as it needs to be and no more. It's the way I always put it. The project exclusion, the project constraints, all need to be a part of that, and assumptions. So what's excluded, what's not in the project, what are the constraints, and I conceptually think of constraints as the virtual box that this project, this scope is in. Those are the constraints. And assumptions. A lot of us don't get our assumptions, don't document them. We make them, we just don't document them. So having a form like this that you can go through and help you, guide you, is a wise thing, especially if you haven't written many of these, if you're just getting going with it. Maybe you have a business analyst that does most of this kind of writing, or a technical writer, but it is a good thing to know and to realize. When we're looking at that scope from a certification kind of way, and we look at the questions that are being asked, that's where you may have some questions of, why didn't you know about certain things? There was no assumption made, or we didn't list the constraints. That kind of thing could come in the question and answer portion. So creating a work breakdown structure, WBS. Now, work breakdown structure, it really gives you the work that it needs to be done to have a successful project. You use your scope management plan, which kind of gives us our framework, our scope statement, requirements documentation, our enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. We use the tools of decomposition. I'll talk about that. Expert judgment. And the output is a scope baseline. Now, the scope baseline is different than the scope statement. Basically, what the scope baseline is going to show us, it says, okay, we know enough now that we can say, this is what we have to do. Here is all the work. And it lays it out in an orderly fashion so that the work can be can be started. Or if there's changes, it lays it out so that we know what has started and what hasn't, and where the changes can be, et cetera, et cetera. So it organizes it. We get project document updates in this process as we're creating the work breakdown structure. And here is the work breakdown structure. It's basically the content of the project. It has discrete quantities of work. Okay? And what I mean by discrete, it doesn't have, it doesn't talk in terms of, I need a bunch. We need, if you need 10, it should say there will be 10. Or you can use fuzzier language, but you need to be aware that that can lead you to have bad estimates, missed stuff. That's why we want it to be discrete quantities of work. And the smaller is not a bad way of doing it. What we use is a hierarchical chart. Now, what does a hierarchical chart mean? It means that I can roll up certain things easily. So if we're having a hierarchical chart of the work for this particular class, on the top level, it could say, this is a PMP prep class. Underneath that, it could be lesson 1. Underneath lesson 1 could be the first slide I do, then the second slide, then the third slide. Then you go to lesson 2. Well, all the slides would roll up to that first lesson, but not 2. Lesson 2 is autonomous. It would roll up to PMP prep. I'll show it to you. Rational composition. I love this one. It needs to be rational. I've seen a lot of WBSs that looked kind of strange because they didn't really make sense. And rational composition just means make sense. It has to make sense to you. Logical structure, again, logically put it together. And this is where when we borrow other people's WBSs and try and retrofit them into our projects, we can get in trouble. Or using templates of other people's work, we get in trouble. So, logical structure, easily understood. Yes, please. Noun-centric. Okay. What does noun-centric mean? Noun-centric, that means we want the stuff that you're doing. You are having, these represent deliverables. Deliverables are not actions. Let me say that again. Deliverables are not actions. I don't need that you're driving a nail. I want to hear a nail is in the wall. One nail is in the wall, 6 inches from a window. That is noun-centric, not I'm nailing or I'm moving. That is activity-centric. There's a place for it, but not in the WBS. The WBS should have items, be noun-centric. So, why do we build it? Understand the purpose of the project. We establish major breakout sections segments of work. It's just not important that you've listed all the work. If it's put together well, logically formed, makes sense, then anybody can look at it and know, oh, well, you're building a car. If you're building a car, you wouldn't want someone to have the instructions for putting the tire on in the wrong section. You wouldn't want those instructions to be buried with instructions on the windshield wiper. Does this make sense? It needs to be able to be broken out into major segments. The other reason is that, for instance, in an application design building project, segments could be pockets of code. I'm doing GUI. I'm building an interface. I'm building a computer. And those can be very distinct pieces that when we get a little further down the road, you'll see have other things that this helps with, like resource allocation, like being able to estimate it. The more distinct and reasonable and rational you are early here, the easier your job is later. So we break it into the large pieces into the next level of components. Continue to the level where you will assign and monitor the work. So you are planning to assign the work. Somebody's going to do it. And you want this to be created in such a way so you can easily go, Joe's going to do this, Jack's going to do that. Oh, and there's too much work here, which we'll get to when we talk about resource allocation, if that happens. You need to get everybody to have buy-in. I won't say that the entire team must do the WBS. I think it tends to work better if a single author puts it together with a vision of how it could be constructed, but then reviews it with the core project team, the client, other key stakeholders, anybody who can make it better. Then that's what you're trying to do. You're just trying to make it better. But you might want to keep a single author or a couple of people doing it. It just might work a little bit better, especially as you're getting used to doing them. Once you feel comfortable with it, then, any way you can be successful. And you prepare a WBS dictionary, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Here's a model. See, it's indented, outdented. That's your hierarchical, and note that all of those lines are numbered, unique numbering system. You don't have to use this numbering system. You could use letters. You could use whatever. It's just whatever works. Remember, we're trying to be successful. We have to keep up with this, and this is a good way of doing it. It's tried and true. Another way of breaking it down has this broken, and you'll see here the project is at the top layer, deliverable, some sub-deliverables, and I have on here control accounts. Remember that concept. When we get into working on earned value management, which we'll be hot and heavy with, control accounts are very important pieces. It's kind of where the money side of it goes. Then these are all broken into work packages. So you should be able to get a work package and understand what someone's doing with the work package, and it rolls up, and you have an easily understood project. The WBS Dictionary, it's not a book of terms or definitions. That always throws people. It provides detailed information on certain work packages. So basically, I'll go back to this. You see here we have a lot of work packages at the bottom. Well, what you want to do with the WBS Dictionary is you want to provide detail. And there are different formats and templates for a WBS dictionary. You know, I'm not showing. I think I've showed you. I'll show you one in a second. But there are a lot of them out there. What you want to look at here is you're trying to get detailed information on the work packages. Well, like what? Capture critical information about the activity, such as, but not limited to, the name and number of the task, the task description, including deliverables to be produced and scheduled, resource requirements, possibly assignments, preceding and subsequent activities. If you already know where this fits in to the sequence of it, note it. If you don't know it yet, you don't know it yet. Cost estimates, if you have any. I mean, if you know that a new tire for a truck is going to cost $200, then if that's part of your WBS, then, you know, note it. Quality requirements. If there are any quality type pieces to this, and we'll talk about quality a lot more a little down the road, different lecture, but realize those quality requirements can be captured right there and in your work breakdown structure data dictionary. It may vary. The whole concept here is we're trying to be controlled and organized, but we don't need to, if your group doesn't use certain things, then you don't need to have them there just because. They should have reasons, and the key reason is it helps you get the job done. It helps you be successful. So, validate scope. Here, inputs. Project management plan, our requirements documentation, our requirements traceability matrix, verified deliverables, work performance data, and we use inspection. We're validating. We're going to look. That's one way of validating, did we get everything that we said we were supposed to. There are group decision-making techniques that may be used in this process as well to validate the scope. And once it's validated, it's accepted. We've verified the deliverables, but we haven't accepted them until we validate. So that's the difference here. We may get change requests through this. We may get some work performance information that we feed into our typical reports, etc. We may get project document updates too. So next we have control scope. Our inputs include the project management plan, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix, work performance data, organizational process assets. We do some variance analysis here as we're trying to figure out, did we deviate? Is it always the same? Is the product supposed to be within a certain range? So that is what variance analysis would do. And we come out with work performance information. We come out with change requests, with project management plan updates, with project document updates. And this is just, we're trying to make sure that the scope is always on track. And if you start it off well and maintain it through the requirements process, using the requirements traceability matrix, seeking the verification of the scope, controlling it as you move forward, it runs itself. It just has to be started well and maintained. And our organizational process assets, we get updates. So that's the scope management piece, knowledge area, and the 6 different processes that we've identified under it. We will leverage this information because, and here's where you're working in a linear mode. And some of the linearity of it is not bad at all. Here, it's better to go, what am I doing? Break the work into pieces. I need to deliver this and this and this and this. And then look at, well, what does it take to do that? And that's where we're going to be going next. We're going to be looking at how to schedule things, how to assign resources to things, how to understand the whole cost. So we'll be marching down those in future lectures.